So at our event in Forest Park, Illinois, was that just yesterday? Was that only yesterday? I asked the group to start with, who is Team Vera? Vera, who loves Vera the best? Okay. Who loves Jimmy the best? Oh, the ladies like Jimmy the best. I see how it's going. Okay. Who likes Matthew Venn the best? Okay, a couple people. He's new. I know. I understand. Who loves everybody so much? Matthew Venn, and yeah, all of them, all the above, right? Yeah, me too. I'm a big fan as well, as Anne knows. So we're going to start with Anne because she's been telling some great stories that I've been sort of collecting, like all the greatest hits of her stories, and now I'm just going to make sure she tells them all to you. The first one is about how you got started, because I know you, basically your origin story all the way to when things changed. Anne talks about her 20-year overnight success.
Okay.
Whoa.
Oh, that's very loud. I've got quite a soft voice, so that's all right, I think. So everybody can hear, and if I get too loud, just wave and I'll shut up a bit. I started writing when I was living on a tiny tidal island called Hilbre, which is in the Dee estuary between the Wirral Peninsula and North Wales, so kind of close to Liverpool on the west coast. I'd met my husband in Shetland, where I was working after I dropped out of university, and he came along as a visiting bird watcher. I showed him to his room in the bird observatory where I was cooking. I thought he would be worth knowing because he had a bottle of very good whiskey tucked in the top of his rucksack. We married a year later, and he worked in conservation the whole of his career, and he was warden of this very small nature reserve. Once the tide came in, we were cut off. We were the only people living on the island. We had no mains electricity, no mains water. It was quite a different existence. And if you're not into birds, and I'm really not, there wasn't much else to do. So that's where I started writing. And that's where the first of the books, which is called A Bird in the Hand, was written. It is no coincidence that in that book I kill off a bird watcher. I hit him over the head with a very heavy brass telescope. So that was the start of my writing life, and I was very lucky. I found a publisher very quickly. But as Lori said, for 20 years, nothing much happened. I'm so grateful to public libraries, because if it weren't for public libraries, I wouldn't have been bought at all, really. I was mostly just published in hardback. They went straight into the libraries. Very few found their way into bookstores. If it weren't for libraries, there would be no Vera on the television, and I wouldn't be sitting here now because I wouldn't still be published. It was their support, getting me out, word of mouth, getting their reading groups to read me that kept me going. So we moved forward 20 years, and I'd already written a Vera novel. It didn't do very well, but a very, very rare bird turned up in Shetland. Tim and I had been back to Shetland many times over the years, but never in midwinter before. This was between Christmas and New Year. I hadn't given him a very exciting Christmas present. So my Christmas present to him was that we would day trip Shetland. This is mad. We had to drive all the way up to Aberdeen in Scotland. The ferry goes from there to Shetland mainland. It's 14 hours on the ferry. Shetland is on the same line of latitude as bits of Greenland and Alaska. It's closer to Bergen in Norway than it is to Edinburgh in Scotland. It's a long way north. And because it was midwinter, we got there. You arrive into Lerwick, the main town, at 7 in the morning. Tim, with great hope, set up his tripod and his telescope, looking out over the loch, waiting for the bird to appear. I went and got the all-day breakfast in the local supermarket because I'm not stupid. Luckily, the bird was still there. You imagine if you've gone all that way and it had flown off in the middle of the night. It was an American coot, quite similar to a British coot. But Tim was so excited to see it. And he saw it very quickly, and the rest of the day, we had the rest of the day to catch up with friends and explore the island before we got the overnight ferry back to Scotland. It had snowed and frozen on top of the snow, and there was no wind, which is really unusual in Shetland. Usually it's quite blowy. And there were ravens everywhere. Raven is the iconic bird in Shetland. In the fire festival, they parade with a banner with a raven on it. But because I'm a crime writer, I thought, if there was blood as well, it would be really mythic, like a fairy story like Sleeping Beauty or Snow White. And that's how the first of the Shetland books was born. And I had this idea in my head that it might make a short story. But I couldn't get rid of the notion that I wanted to write this book. And quite by chance, at that point I was working in public libraries and I was training library staff. And I went up to do a training session up in Shetland. Got to meet the literature officer there, a guy called Alec Clunas, and said, what do you think about me setting a novel in Shetland? Would it be an impertinence? I'm not a Shetlander, I don't live here. And he said, go for it, I'll help you in any way you can. And he set up a meeting with a former cop. I can remember sitting there chatting to this cop. What would you do if there was a murder on Shetland? Would you solve it, or would they send somebody in from outside? No, we'd send in the serious crime squad from Inverness. So you'd charter a plane and you'd come in. No, we wouldn't have a budget to charter a plane. Come in on the scheduled flight. Okay. For years, these flights were manned by a company called Flybe. The islanders called them Maybe. Because quite often, if it was foggy or if it was stormy, the flights couldn't get in. So I asked, what would you do if the plane couldn't get in? You've got this body lying in the snow. What do you do if the plane can't get in there? We'd cover it with a bit of tarpaulin and we'd wait. So I think you'll agree, it's these small details that really bring a story and a character to life. So yeah, Raven Black, which is the first of the Shetland books, was my breakthrough book, but it was the 20th book I'd written, and I was 20 years in at that point, and it made a real difference to my career.
I also like the story about how that idea that you would write that story was received by your publisher. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I sent it into my publisher. I had a really brilliant editor at the time, and she said, well, we obviously we can't spend anything on marketing for you, because they don't really until you're already selling. There is this mantra, marketing spend follows sales, which is a bit counterintuitive, really. But, I'll get the word out. But of course, she said, it'll have to be a standalone novel. It would stretch credibility too far to have more than one murder in a population as small as Shetland. But then the book went on to win the Gold Dagger, and it started to sell better than anything I'd written before. And I got this email from her saying, well, maybe it would run to a small series. So that's how I was able to carry on writing Shetland.
Around that time, something else happened that changed the path of your career. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think, I've won these awards and I've got these doctorates, but what you can't get an award for is luck. And most of my career have been sort of sprinkled with odd moments of great luck. And this is one of them. I explained that by the time I'd started writing about Shetland, I'd already written the first Vera book. And that was written because I had a very trendy young new editor at my publishing. And she said, well, I'm not going to publish any more traditional detective stories. They're never going to sell anymore. They're really old-fashioned. So what I'd like you to write is a big standalone novel of psychological suspense. I was broke. I would have written whatever she wanted. So I had this idea for a novel about 3 women who were doing a survey before the creation of a big new quarry. So there were 3 environmentalists. I could write about that. But I don't plot, so about a third of the way through, I was really stuck with this book. And it was your great thriller writer, Raymond Chandler, who said, if you're stuck with a story, have a guy burst through a door with a gun. And if you've read Raymond Chandler, he does that a lot. But I'm British, I don't do guns. So I thought, but I will have a door burst open and see who comes through. And who came through, I was writing a funeral scene, and the service has already started, but the door bursts open. And in came Vera Stanhope, fully formed, one of those magic moments that sometimes happens when you're writing. I describe her as looking more like a bag lady than a detective. She's got a plastic supermarket bag and she's got all her notes in there instead of a briefcase. And so that was the start of the book, The Crow Trap, which was the first of the Vera novels. But it didn't sell very well because my editor didn't really like it because it had a detective in it. Luckily, she married a music journalist and moved to Australia very quickly afterwards. But because the book didn't sell, there were lots of the paperbacks were knocking around in Remainer bookshops and charity shops. And one of them ended up in an Oxfam shop in North London. And somebody came in looking for a book to read to take on their holidays. Nothing at all unusual in that. But the woman who'd picked it up was called Elaine Collins, and she was books executive for ITV Studios. And they were looking for a cop series with a strong female lead. And that's how Vera came to be on the television. Just luck. Every crime writer in the UK now puts their novels in that Oxfam shop.
Just slew them about, just hoping someone will pick them up.
Absolutely, yeah. So just luck. And maybe my grandsons think this is even more lucky because Elaine is married to an actor called Peter Capaldi. And so Doctor Who has cooked my supper. Capaldi is the actor who played Doctor Who and in the thick of it, other things.
One of the actors who played
Doctor one of the actors who played Doctor
It's a thing. So the TV show, of course, TV shows, 3 different TV shows. That's a big deal.
Are you jealous?
I am a little jealous.
Again, all over the country, there are crime writers who make little wax models of me and stick pins in everywhere.
Well, we did decide today that we're going to make a Funko Pop of Vera. We have to make our own. I don't think she's had one made, but we can make a little Funko Pop of you.
Stick pins in me.
Stick pins in it, exactly. So the TV series, I think people like to hear about some of that. What is your relationship to the TV versions of your books?
I think because Elaine picked up the book that way, we weren't going through agents. And I remember going to so I was involved right from the beginning. It wasn't a traditional author, filmmaker kind of scene. I can remember going to a meeting in a very flash office on the South Bank in London, talking about, who might play Vera. And my only red line really was that they film in Northumberland where the books are set, because it seemed to me that place is so much at the heart of it that I didn't want them trying to pretend that somewhere else was where I was. And so she agreed that the lead scriptwriter would come up to Northumberland and would spend and she would come too, and they would spend a bit of time with me and I'd show them around. I wanted them to believe that I was a very famous crime writer. I hadn't signed the contract at this point. I drove a really clapped out old car. So Tim and I, my husband and I, decided we would hire a car to drive them round Northumberland. We hired this great big 4x4 because it looked really smart, and it was quite high up, so you'd be able to see over the hedges and the dry stone walls, and we get a good view. But Tim had never driven it before, and he's not a brilliant driver. And of course, we don't really do automatics much. So he was really struggling with it. So we would sort of judder all the way around these narrow lanes through the countryside. And Elaine gets very, very travel sick. So at one point we had to drop her at a station so she could go back to the town. But that was great because it meant that Paul, the lead writer, and I had 3 days on our own just to talk about stories and what we saw in the book and about the characters. And that was such a luxury because it doesn't happen very often. And so I think even though he and the production company change details and I don't care really if they change the murderer even. What I care about is that they capture the atmosphere and the ethos of the books and the character, and I think they do that beautifully. So having met Paul and having met Elaine, I decided that I wasn't going to meddle, that I had written the books, I'd loved doing them, and that they should have the creative freedom to do their own things with the films. So, and if I was there every 5 minutes say, oh, my Vera wouldn't do that, or no, you can't do that, then that would muddy their vision and would make it a much less good bit of television. So I stand back, I let them get on with it. Because I don't interfere, we get on very well. I get invited to the read-throughs and the wrap parties, which is also very nice. I've become a good friend with Brenda Blethyn, who plays the role, because I think she's a great reader. She always reads the books, and she's a very generous individual. So she'll do literature festivals and things with me, and come and sign books and all that. So it works very.
She called me pet.
She does, yeah. She is, and when Paul was like my mole inside the production company, you know, because we got on so well. He told me what was going on because they don't really tell you otherwise what's going on. And I knew that they'd offered the script to Brenda Blethyn to be Vera. And of course, she was huge at that time because she'd just been Oscar nominated for Secrets and Lies and for Little Voice. So she was a huge name in film and television. And she'd worked at the Royal Shakespeare Company and she'd worked at the National Theatre. So we knew that if she said yes, the show was likely to run. And I was walking to the pub in our local town with my husband, and I got this phone call from Paul, and all he said was, she said yes. Mm-hmm. But you can't tell anyone because it's a deadly secret, and ITV want to make a big announcement. So we walked onto the pub, bought everyone in a bar and a drink, and couldn't tell them why. It's the only way we could celebrate.
There have been a couple of headlines recently about both of the shows. Do you want to tell the folks in case they're not hanging on every Vera/Shetland news item like I do?
Yeah, so Shetland is filming again at the moment. They're up in the islands filming now. Dougie Henshall, the actor who played Jimmy Perez, has left, but he is being replaced by another great Scottish actor, a woman called Ashley Jensen, who some of you might have seen in Agatha Raisin and Ugly Betty and Extras and things like that. She's a great actor. And I was at the read-through, so I know a bit about the background to it, and I think she's called Ruth Calder in the show. And she is a Shetlander who went and worked in the Met in London and doesn't really want to be back in Shetland, but has found herself back there for an important case. And Tosh will still be there, Sandy will still be there, and I think it'll just, I've read the script and I think it's a great script, so I look forward to that. Vera starts filming next month. Kenny Doughty, who plays Aidan, has left, but David Leon, who plays Joe, has come back. So
yeah.
Joe Ashworth is back where he belongs, and he's local, and so his voice is absolutely right. And I know because Laurie likes a bit of gossip. The reason why Kenny Doughty, who plays Aidan, has left is because he is madly in love. He is madly in love with Ashley Jensen. So he is up in Shetland a minute, being with her while they film Shetland.
It is the ultimate in Cleeves crossover, I think. It's what we all hoped for.
So I got this lovely email from Kenny when they first went up to film with this photo of this beautiful beach. Oh my God, I can understand why you love it so much. I'm having such a good time. So, yeah.
I hope they put him on the show. That's what I hope.
I
He's
doubt
hanging around. What else is he doing? Let's talk a little bit about writing.
Okay.
What's your process for when there's, it's time to write a new Vera book? What happens?
I get some sort of thing at the back of my head that's niggling that I want to write about. So my most recent book is called The Rising Tide. That was my lockdown book, really. And so we were sat at home. I really struggled to write at first. I knew that I needed to start a book, but I couldn't start. I was fixated on COVID and watching the daily briefings and listening to the numbers. And it was only because we didn't really know who was in danger at first, did we? And one of my grandsons is severely asthmatic, and he'd been in hospital after a major episode. And we really didn't want him to go home because he has 4 siblings and they're sort of mucky, aren't they, kids? We didn't know how many germs they would be spreading around themselves. So he came and stayed with me. We could have his own bedroom and his own bathroom. And so we were locked down together, Ollie and I, and that helped me start writing because I was sort of homeschooling him, and he would sit at the kitchen table and do what he was doing, open his laptop. Slid very quickly, I think, into Minecraft. but because I was sitting there, I started writing too. And I think, obviously, I knew intellectually that I was going to die. You know, we all know that we are going to die. But COVID hit me like in my guts, that awareness of my own mortality. You're getting older. Sometime you're going to... And I wanted to write about a group of people of about my age who were also aware that they were aging, looking back at what they'd achieved and wanting still to achieve something more. So I had a group of old school friends, and the fiction is that they meet every 5 years. They have a school reunion every 5 years on Holy Island, which is an island off the Northumberland coast. It's very spiritual. It's where Christianity first came to the UK, and it's got an old priory, and people do make a pilgrimage there. You can walk across at low water, or you can drive across the causeway at low water. And one of them dies, obviously. So it's a kind of celebration of friendship, but it's also that sense of claustrophobia and being shut down and locked down, and how we survive that. So
you've got a niggling idea, you write, do you write every day?
I try to write every day, yeah. I can't write more than about 1,500 words a day because I think concentration is the biggest skill that a writer needs. If we can't fix the world within our head, we can't expect the reader to see it. And after about 1,200 words, I'm starting to lose concentration. So I write very early in the morning, I get up early, I usually wake up about 5:30, and I drink lots of tea. Like you, I sit at the kitchen table and I just tell my story, and I love it. I'm there. What other job could you sit in your pajamas, drinking tea, making stuff up and calling it work?
Trying to think what I want to ask next.
We could talk about your books.
What do you want to know?
How do you start a new book?
How do I start a new book?
Because you don't even write series. At least I know what characters I'm going to be writing about every time it's new for you.
It is. I write standalones. None of the books have anything really to do with one another. Usually what happens is I have one piece of an idea. Maybe I have a situation I want to write about, or a certain character I want to write about, or a certain crime or something. And then when I get a few points on the map, just a few things that I know, I start to write, and I just write my way into the story, into trouble, and then I have to write myself out. Somewhere in the middle, there's usually a crisis for me.
Yeah, 60,000 words in, it's like wading through blancmange.
It's, yeah, about 2/3 of the way through, I've written myself into some deep crap and have to figure my character's way out, my way out of the story. And I call it the dark night of the soul.
That's
It's
very
usually 3 to 6
fancy.
weeks of dark nights of the soul. There's lots of, rending of the hair and the clothing. And it just, sometimes you just have to go back to the beginning and see what you've given yourself to work with, to push on through. You do that too? Do you have dark nights of the soul? You don't seem like a dark nights of the soul kind of lady, Anne.
I just go for a
Cleeves.
long walk and try and work it out. Yeah. You should try that, Lori.
Oh, I go for 3 walks a day. I have a dog. Does not work for me. So let's talk about the series thing. How do you keep a series fresh over the course of many books?
I think I've stopped writing about Shetland just because place is so important to me. I think we're a product of where we grew up, the streets we played in, the community that we're a part of. That's what makes us. And I think I write about what keeps a community together and what breaks it apart, and what keeps a family together and what breaks it apart is more important to me than the crime, really. And a kind of psychological archaeology where we're digging back into characters' past to see what makes them who they are. And so I'd written 8 books about Shetland. I love it, but there are only 21,000 people living there. I'd covered pretty well.
She killed them all, you guys.
BBC killed off more than I did. So I'd said all that I wanted to say about the islands, I think. So that's why I stopped. But Northumberland, which is where I live, I'll try and describe my patch. It's north of the River Tyne. To the east, I have the North Sea. To the west, I have the Pennines. And to the north, I have the Scottish border. So that's the area that I'm writing about, the old county of Northumberland. And it has such a wide palette of different places. So we have beautiful beaches, the uplands that you'll have seen if you've watched Vera. But inland rural is very feudal still. So there are big country houses, think Downton Abbey, those sort of big country houses with big country estates. So the people who are farming for the big house. If you fall out with the landowner, you don't just lose your job, you lose your home because they're all tied cottages still. So there's that very old-fashioned kind of community. And I've got a cottage up in the hills and I love it, and I love that sort of community, but it is very different from anything else. But we also have a very interesting post-industrial landscape. So we used to mine coal. We had, I don't know, I think when I first moved to the northeast, there was something like 35 working pits, even then. And then we had Thatcher, and we almost overnight, the pit shut. We know that we don't want to burn coal anymore, but those communities died almost overnight because nothing was put in to replace them. So there are pockets of real deprivation. We used to build ships, and we don't do that anymore. And the northeast is the most deprived in the whole of the UK. We have poorer health, we have more unemployment, higher levels of poverty. So I can write about that. So we've got these great big houses and all the wealthy people, and we've got faded seaside towns, and we've got small market towns. So that's where I start when I'm writing a series novel, is with a place and with a community and the sort of people that I want to write about. And because I've got that variety, that's, I think, how I can keep it fresh, because I'm writing about a different set of people each time.
While you're talking, your earrings are swinging, and
Oh, sorry.
Agatha Christie is winking at me. She's got Agatha Christie.
Agatha Christie earrings just for Lori.
Aww. Which reminds me, you have a series set in Devon.
I do have a series set in Devon. Devon is where I grew up. That's where I went to school. It's touristy, it's just up from Cornwall, it's where people go to surf and to eat cream teas. But I never thought I would be able to set a series there because it is sort of on the cosy side, I think. I think publishers, when they suggested that I wrote there, were thinking of thatched cottages, cream teas, all that.
Do not knock cream teas. Cream teas are fantastic.
Okay. But so my husband died very suddenly 5 years ago, and I just needed to run away from, not from him or the memories, but from the pity and the sympathy and people being nice to me. And I ran away to North Devon to stay with a school friend, one of the school friends who kind of triggered the idea for the Rising Tide, because we're a very close group still. And she'd grown up in a very close, enclosed evangelical community. And there are some of those in the West Country, Plymouth Brethren, Exclusive Brethren. Not cruel or unkind, but very certain. So when the day of rapture comes, if you're with us, you'll be saved, and if you're not, you'll be damned. And it seemed to me that someone who'd grown up with that kind of faith, but who, in their late teens, early 20s, like some of us do, lost their faith at that time, they would feel very chaotic and unanchored, and that they might join the police service as a way of finding duty on a community. And that's how Matthew Venn was born. And it was February, and it wasn't pretty when I was there. It was grey, and it was miserable. And the wind was blowing, and we went for a walk to somewhere called Crow Point, which is sort of being washed away by the sea. And so I had my character, and I had the place where my body was going to be found. And then the people, so I hadn't started writing, something wasn't quite there. And the people who'd looked after me when Tim died, when my husband died, who scooped me up from the hospital and fed me tea and wine and let me cry, and who still will phone and say, we're going out to dinner, do you fancy coming? We're a gay couple, Martin and Paul, and we'd been friends with them for years and had gone on holiday with them. And I wanted to celebrate the relationship that they had, and I made Matthew gay, because I thought that would also explain why reconciliation with the brethren was so tricky. And so, I'm a straight older woman, but I wrote about a gay marriage. And it's the only happy marriage I've ever written, and I love writing about it. So that's Matthew Venn. And the new book featuring him is called The Raging Storm, and that comes out at the end of August here. And I've been so moved going round doing bookshops in the UK, and a couple of times an older guy will come up, because this was televised too. When I was young, it was illegal. We never thought we would see mainstream popular television with a gay married couple in the lead roles, almost in tears, and it's so moving.
Well, we're going to have some time for questions from the audience. So if you've got a question for Anne, you can ask me something if you want to.
Yeah,
but
I met her do some
Anne,
work. Let's ask.
I know you don't want to. It's okay. I like to hear her talk too. Her accent is so much better than mine.
Just wait, I'm going to drag her on tour in the UK. And I'll ask her the questions, and she'll have to tell her stories.
And they'll make fun of my accent, and it'll be fun. And we'll have cream teas.
I cook. The one thing that I can do, because I cooked in the bed observatory on Vera, I could probably knock out 24 scones standing on my head.
Let's do that. I loved cream teas. When I went to Greenway, that's what we ate for breakfast every day, because, yeah, I know, it's not a breakfast. Because we stayed in the house, we stayed at Agatha Christie's house, Greenway, but it was closed after 5:30. Everybody went home, and it didn't open up again until 10 a.m. I needed my tea, as you know, And that was the food that was available to us. Otherwise, we had to carry things in. So we had a cream tea. It's just tea with a scone and some
And a
clotted cream.
great dollop of clotted cream and a huge pot of jam. I know you, Lori.
And it was delicious. 3 mornings in a row. I'd do it again. Were there any questions from the, yeah?
Yes, for Anne, you were talking about your televised series. I was wondering if you ever had the chance to chat with Sue Grafton about her total opposition to having her series televised.
No,
Let me repeat the question. So the gentleman wants to know about your series are televised. Have you ever checked in with Sue Grafton, who famously did not want her series televised?
no, I did meet Sue Grafton once because we were sharing an American publisher, I think, and they did VoucherCon, the big crime festival in London. In my early days, it must have been the late 80s, and I went to a very swanky dinner hosted by my publisher, and I couldn't believe, I was new, I was unknown, and there I was sitting next to Sue Grafton. But I think I was so nervous that I didn't say a word. I just didn't speak to her at all. I just shook. I think that people deal with this in different ways, and I know other authors who have wanted their name as an executive producer, who wanted control, who wanted to keep an eye on what was going on. I decided not to do that because I did trust the team, and it's the same production team that make all three. And I think they do I think that the cinematography is beautiful, and I think that characterization is really great. So I'm very happy. I think you would just you'd turn into a nervous wreck if you got anxious and you wanted to interfere. And I know from other writers that they don't listen to you anyway. You might have your name as executive producer, but they don't listen to you. They do what they want. So much better do what Sue Grafton decided to do and not give it to anybody, or give it and just let them get on with it. I don't think there's a happy medium.
Well, she didn't let anybody do it, but then she died, and her family has actually agreed to have it filmed. So there's some controversy there as well. She's gone, but I guess her family.
Somebody said what you do is you throw your manuscript over the fence and they throw the money back to you over the fence.
Throw the money, absolutely. Were there other questions? Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What got you up to Northumberland? That's a long way from Devon and a long way from Shetland, too.
So how did you get to Northumberland from Europe?
That was my husband's work. He worked for the RSPB, which is a conservation charity, and he was a conservation officer, and the headquarters for the north of England was in Newcastle, which is the city in the northeast in Northumberland. So that's why we moved there, and I have been so lucky. The 3 places that I've lived, Shetland, Devon and Northumberland, just beautiful places to live and perfect place to kill people off.
Because you've been there and you know them. Although I just want to say that Northumberland and North Devon are not that far apart. You're asking, how did she ever? It's still England. It's Shetland that's...
Shetland's a long way up, but yeah, North Devon is it's a bit on the train. It probably takes 7 hours on the train. They're right at the opposite ends of the country, so you're right.
You can drive to Chicago in 6 hours from here. Just saying.
There's a lady here in the front, yeah.
I just wondered if you read other writers and if that affects you, or do you try to stay away from that?
She wants to know if Anne reads other writers, and does that affect your writing? Do you try to keep it away from that?
I think there are a couple of writers that I don't read when I'm writing because their voices, they're so strong. And I do find myself thinking in their words somehow. John le Carré, I can't read him when I'm writing because he's got such a unique style that it is quite hard not to let it feed into your head. Otherwise, no, I need to read. I can't go a day without reading. How can you not read? And I just need that escape and that comfort at the end of a day. So I always read in bed before I go to sleep. I can't imagine not reading. And that's really, you were talking about the Reading for Wellbeing program, Jen. That's really why I decided to throw out the idea and to sponsor it, because reading has always been an escape for bad times for me. You know, I like Lori, I'm a cancer survivor. My husband went through periods of really severe illness. When he died, I needed an escape, and what I escape into is story. If you've got these horrible ideas and thoughts rattling around in your head, you need to be inside somebody else's for a bit, and fiction does that.
Yeah, more questions? Yes.
So, on that note then, what do you read mysteries, or what do you like to read, and who do you like to read?
They're digging out book recommendations from Ann Cleeves. What do you like to read? Is it mystery? Who is it? Give us their names now.
Okay, I love to read mysteries, and if I'm really miserable, you know, from when I was young, you know, if I had the flu or if I'd just been dumped by a boyfriend, what I went to was Golden Age crime. So I was never a Christie fan. I think she's too cold and ruthless.
I'll forgive you.
She kills schoolgirls, you know. She wrote serial killers.
You killed everyone in Shetland.
But I loved the others: Dorothy Sayers, Marjorie Allingham, Nia Marsh, Josephine Tay, and those were my comfort reading. Now that I think we're in a really new golden age of crime writing. There is some brilliant crime writing out there, and I love books set in other places because I love to travel, and it's a way of traveling vicariously. So I went through a period of Aussie noir. So Jane Harper, The Dry was her first one, Exiles is her most recent one. And if you enjoyed her, read Chris Hammer. The first one is called Scrublands. Again, that dry, small community out in the bush. And if you love both those and you've run out of those, there's a new writer called Hayley Scrivener, who wrote a book called Dirt Town, and I think she's as good as either of those. Jen nodding at the back, lovely. So I went through an Aussie period, and if any of you are coming to Malice Domestic, which is a crime convention near DC, the two Brits that they're celebrating are both of Indian heritage, and one is called Abir Mukherjee. And he sets a nod here, I like that. He sets his stuff in the 1920s in India, pre-independence. So he's looking at what it's like to be a second-class citizen in your own country, really. And his hero, but without being preachy in any sense at all, his hero is called Sam Wyndham. He's just survived the First World War, but he's a morphine addict because he was wounded, so he has real demons of his own. His second in command is called Suren. He is high caste Indian who was actually educated in Britain, in Harrow and Cambridge, much better educated than the man that he has to support, but because he's Indian, he will always be second. And the book is called The Rising Man, and there are a whole series, but that's the first one, and I would suggest starting with the first one, which is fabulous. Yeah.
Have either of you participated in hybrid interviews with libraries, either around the country or for you in the UK?
Have we participated in like online, the virtual?
There's actually a library in Huntington, Long Island, and they have a program called Kiss Me, Kill Me. And as a result of COVID, when it was strictly virtual, they had authors coming, and now that they're back in business, they've got people at the library, and then there are people in Long Island, in Ohio, who are attending. And it's so wonderful to be able to get to see a live author once a month and so we're lucky to have two of you here today. But I don't know if you've had the opportunity and whatever, but I think it's great if you're ever asked, you should definitely do it because it will open you up to so many people all over.
Kiss me, kill me?
Kiss me, kill me.
I'm in. That sounds great. The question is, do we do virtual events for libraries, bookstores? And I think the answer for both of us.
Yeah, I think so, and I think this is going to be made available, or is it the one we're doing tomorrow is going to be made
Maybe
available?
a podcast of some sort. This one will be
Yeah.
available.
So-
The one tomorrow is available live.
Yeah, and certainly it's great because suddenly it's become possible. So I've done stuff with audiences in India and Australia and Canada and with some libraries here in the US as well. I would much rather be here in person. I am totally zoomed out. I really would. I'll fly the Atlantic to come and talk to you rather than sit at my kitchen table and chat. Yeah, you?
You mentioned that the first book that you wrote was a result of being isolated and not having much else to do. But before that, had you written short stories or other books that you just never published, or was that really the beginning of writing for you?
The question is, A Bird in Hand was your first book, and you wrote it in response to being isolated, but are there some early papers somewhere and of things that maybe didn't succeed or you didn't finish?
Yeah, I thought I was going to be a great writer of literary works. And I can remember starting one book. And I don't think I'm bad at creating character. You know, I think I'm very nosy, I'm very curious, and I'm really interested in other people's lives, and I think that's what you need to write character. So I'm okay at character, but I really, really struggle with plot. You can't just have a bunch of interesting people sat in a room talking. You know, that doesn't make a very interesting book. But once I killed one of them off, I was away. I was going. And so this idea that I was going to write this great novel of social comment, and in fact, I think we can still do that. You know, we can write about social justice. That's what certainly in the UK, a lot of police officers' time is spent looking for kids who've run away from children's homes and picking up people who are mentally ill and sitting with them because there are no spaces in psychiatric hospitals for them. So they're there looking after them. They're trying to look for elderly people with dementia who are wandering the streets. Certainly in the UK, I don't know what it's like in the US. Our police officers act as much as social workers as they do law enforcers. And so we can write about all the things that I always wanted to write about, but still, I hope, write quite popular and accessible stories. And what writing police procedurals or crime fiction does for me is give me a structure. It gives me that corset to hold me up. I think it was Katrina McPherson who talks about the format of the crime novel being a corset to hold you up. And it doesn't limit you. You can subvert the rules, you can write what you like, but it's very confidence building to have that structure. So if you're a new aspiring writer, give it a go. Crime is the way to go.
Agreed. If you're an aspiring writer, I would put a commercial in here for Sisters in Crime. It's an organization that I was national president of, and it's great for, learning things from other writers. They have 2 classes a month virtually that anyone can attend, and it's a great organization.
Guppies.
Are you Guppy?
Yeah.
Are you okay? So the Guppy is the Great Unpublished. So it's the really beginning writers, and it's all virtual, very low-cost chapter that you can belong to. Yeah, great organization. Other questions? I thought there. Yeah.
I love Unplugged and Shetland, but were you a bit surprised when they didn't cast a Hispanic person as you've written? And my second question is, why did you kill Freya?
Okay, 2-parter here.
And a bit of a spoiler, if you haven't read Blue Lightning, you might want to stick your fingers in your ears.
Okay, so Jimmy Perez, I got to say it right, Jimmy Perez, is a swarthy character in the books and in the TV show.
He's ginger.
Doogie. He's a
Yeah.
pasty Scot. How did you feel about that?
I thought it was a shame at first, but the story behind Jimmy Perez is that the first book, as I explained, was going to be a standalone novel, and it's about what makes somebody belong and what makes them an outsider. I was quite interested in looking at that because I was living, before we moved to Northumberland, we had a brief spell in Yorkshire where there's a big population from the South Asian continent, so lots of people who look a bit different. How long do you have to be there before you actually feel that you are welcome? I thought it was quite an important subject to cover. And I wanted a central character who belonged but also didn't belong, who looked different. And there was a Spanish Armada ship wrecked off Fair Isle in the 16th century. It was called El Gran Grifon, and there were 60 survivors. So not impossible that one or two of them might have married local women, island women, but the name and the dark good looks continued. And I was thinking David Tennant might be quite good. Looks quite dark, but he was doing a sort of minor project called Broadchurch, which was quite big in the UK at the time, which was a bit annoying. But then I went to the first read-through and Dougie was there and he read and I knew it would be all right. Yeah, he was such a good actor. He came up to me afterwards. He's not a great reader like Brenda is. Brenda reads absolutely everything, but he came up to me and said, just sum up Jimmy Perez. Tell me about him. And I said, well, his ex-wife says that he's emotionally incontinent. You know, he gives so much of himself to his work and to the witnesses and even to the perpetrators that he has no emotion left for his family. And that's why his relationships break up. So he went on to be brilliant. And Fran, fictitious happy marriages are quite tedious. So, yeah. The 4 books that came after about his grieving, that was quite fun to write.
Well, I think for the same reason that the TV show changed Cassie from
a toddler into it because
into a teenager. More drama.
More drama, but also working with children is a nightmare. Apparently, I'm told.
And you're not allowed to kill them, all that.
Yeah.
In fiction. I have one more question, I think, to wrap this up, and then we'll sign some books. After your name these days are 3 letters that we didn't mention in the bio. She's rolling her eyes already. Anne Cleeves, OBE. Order of the British Empire. You're an officer of the British Empire. See? Americans like it. It's like you're royalty. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the stories you were telling me from that? Are really funny.
Right, I got an email from the Honours Office, whatever they call themselves, saying they wanted to give me an OBE for services to literature. And first of all, I thought, I don't want an honour that has empire in the title, thank you very much. I think we've got beyond that. But unfortunately, they'd sent the same email to my publicist. So she got, oh, you've got to do it, and it'd be brilliant, just go for it. Your daughters will want to dress up and go to the palace. Yeah, do it. So I compromised. I phoned up the office that had asked if I wanted to be an OBE and said, I don't think I want an honour for doing what I love, sitting in my pyjamas at the kitchen table and making stuff up, and getting quite well paid for it now, thank you. But if you were to offer me an OBE for services to reading and libraries, I might be quite flattered, and that would give me a chance to go out and shout about libraries and reading. Oh, she said, I'll have to run it past the palace. At the time, I thought the palace had other things to worry about. They were sort of mired in other stuff. So I never heard back, so I thought, oh, right, I've obviously annoyed them for being cheeky. That's it, I won't get it. But on New Year's Day, I was up at the cottage with all my grandchildren. I got this text from a local journo saying, congrats on the honour. So I had to text back and say, what did they give it me for? Reading in libraries. Oh, okay. So that was all right. I compromised as well. I don't wear hats. If you go to the palace to get the honour, you have to wear a hat. You're only allowed one person with you, but you can choose to be given it locally by a representative of the Crown. It's called the Lord Lieutenant of the county. I chose to have it done locally. I try not to be too political here. My grandfather was a miner, and it's a working area. So the Lord Lieutenant of Northumbria came in and awarded it me with a few other people who decided not to wear the hats and to get it done locally. And it was in Gateshead Town Hall, which is a lovely old town hall. And the mining unions used to have amazingly intricate banners that they used to parade behind on gala days. And they have some of these banners in the town hall. So my grandfather would have hated me getting an honour from the Crown, but he would have loved to see me getting it, be just standing in front of one of these huge National Union of Miners banners. So I have lots of pictures of that. And then we all went out and had cream tea.
The only way to celebrate anything, I think. I think we are finished, and thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much, and thank you to Lori, and thank you to Jen.